Whispers from the Cubicle, a workplace horror collection set in South Korea. Chapter 1. The lizard-like creature in the backyard office. The scratching started again at 11:47 p.m. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, willing my hands to stop shaking. The sound came from directly above my head, nails dragging across the wooden ceiling of my backyard office, slow and deliberate, as if whatever made it wanted me to know it was there. 3 wet handprints had appeared on the window behind my monitor. They hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. My daughter's scream pierced through the glass walls, carried down from the main house on the hill. "Appa, someone went into your office. I saw them crawl down." But I was alone. The door was locked from the inside. I'd built this office myself last spring, back when the world made sense. I remembered painting these walls with my wife, laughing about how this would be my sanctuary from the chaos of my sole consulting firm, a place to work remotely, surrounded by the peaceful forests of Bukhansan's foothills. Now the forest pressed against the windows like something hungry, and the white paint I'd so carefully applied was streaked with handprints that wept moisture like tears. "Minhoya, kenchanayo?" My wife's voice, distant, worried. I couldn't answer. A 4th handprint was forming on the glass, spreading from nowhere, the moisture condensing into the shape of fingers that were too long, too thin, with too many joints. The scratching stopped. The silence was worse. I forced myself to look up at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered. In the strobe of dying light, I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong to anything in the room, stretched across the ceiling like a stain. It moved, contracted, breathed. My chair rolled backward of its own accord. The keyboard under my fingers was slick with something that might have been sweat, but felt colder. "Appa!" My daughter Leah again, but this time her voice was wrong, too calm. "It's still there, Appa. It's watching you. It says hello." Leah was 7. She'd been having nightmares for 2 weeks, ever since we finished construction. Voices in the walls, she said, something that lived in the hill behind our house and didn't like that we'd built here. I dismissed it as imagination. I wasn't dismissing anything anymore. The handprints on the window were multiplying, overlapping, a chorus of impossible hands pressed against glass that should have been impenetrable. From outside, I heard something that might have been laughter, if laughter could sound like bones cracking. I grabbed my phone. My fingers were numb. I knocked over my coffee mug, and when I looked down, the spilled liquid wasn't brown anymore. It was dark, viscous, and in it floated something small and white that might have been a tooth. The scratching resumed, faster now, frantic, moving across the ceiling toward the corner where the shadows were deepest. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey, and somewhere in the primitive part of my brain, I understood that if I moved, if I acknowledged what was happening, it would become irreversibly real. The fluorescent light exploded. Glass rained down on my desk. In the darkness, lit only by the sickly blue glow of my monitor, I saw it. Clinging to the corner of the ceiling, folded into an impossible angle, was something that never had been human. Its skin was pale, not white, but the gray-yellow of a corpse left too long in water. Its body was naked and hairless, limbs bent backward at the joints, like a lizard frozen mid-crawl. And its eyes were yellow. Not gold, not amber, the yellow of infection, of poison ignored too long. It opened its mouth, and a tongue unrolled, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, black and glistening, tasting the air between us.
I couldn't scream. The sound died in my throat, strangled by a terror so complete it felt like drowning. The creature tilted its head, a gesture almost curious, almost human, and that made it infinitely worse. Its lips peeled back from teeth that were needle-thin and translucent, and I heard it breathe, a wet, rattling sound like something dying in a swamp. It dropped, not fell, dropped, controlled, landing on my desk without a sound, scattering papers and pens, crouching inches from my face. The smell hit me, rotting leaves and copper and something sweeter, something like decay masked by flowers. Its tongue brushed my cheek, cold, so cold it burned. Then it was gone. Through the window, through the glass, which should have shattered but simply rippled like water, out into the forest that had spawned it. I sat frozen until the security guard found me at 3 a.m., my wife having called in a panic. Park Sunbay was 60 years old, had worked security for our neighborhood for 30 years, and when he saw my face, he didn't ask what happened. He knew. "You built on the wrong hill," he said, his voice low and urgent as he checked the corners of my office with a flashlight. "We've been hunting that thing for 15 years, ever since it took the Yoon family's baby from the house at the top of the ridge." "What is it?" My voice didn't sound like my own. "Dokebi do anigo, guishin do anigo," something older, before the temples, before the shamans. It lives in the soil, in the roots, and now he shone his light on the handprints, still wet, still spreading. Now it knows your daughter can hear it. The blood drained from my face. "Leah?" I ran. The forest on either side of the path to my house seemed to lean inward, branches reaching like fingers, and in the darkness between the trees, I swear I saw yellow eyes, not one pair, not two, but dozens, blinking in unison. I found Leah in her bed, awake, staring at the ceiling. "It followed you home, Appa. It's in the walls now. Can't you hear it breathing?" I listened. I heard it. The scratching started again, not from the backyard office, but from inside the walls of my home, traveling slowly, deliberately, toward my daughter's room. We never caught it. Park Sunbay said we never would. Some things, he told me, don't want to be caught. They want to be invited. And somehow, by building that office, by breaking ground on that hill, I had done exactly that. I still work from home. I have no choice. But I no longer use the backyard office. No one does. The handprints never dried. The scratching never stopped. And every night, just before midnight, Leah sits up in bed and whispers to something I cannot see, answering questions I cannot hear in a language that sounds like roots growing through stone. The creature is patient. It can wait.
Chapter 2. The Body Snatcher. Rosalie was standing in front of the water cooler when I came back from lunch, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. She wasn't drinking, wasn't moving. She was simply standing, her back to the room, staring at the wall with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The fluorescent lights of our sales office in Gangnam hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of corporate gray that made the hours blur together. "Sunbay," I kept my voice light, casual. "You okay?" She turned, and her smile was perfect. Too perfect. The Rosalie I'd known for 3 years smiled with her whole face, eyes crinkling, a slight asymmetry from a childhood scar near her lip. This smile was symmetrical, mechanical, like someone had studied photographs of human expressions and was attempting to replicate one from memory. "Krenchanayo, Samuel," she said. My name sounded strange in her mouth, the syllables landing wrong. "I was just thinking." I nodded and moved to my desk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I glanced back, Rosalie was still standing by the water cooler, still smiling. She hadn't blinked. The afternoon passed in a haze of spreadsheets and client calls, but I kept watching her from the corner of my eye. The wrongness accumulated in small details. She typed without looking at her screen. She laughed at a joke our manager made 3 seconds too late, as if the humor had to be translated through some internal delay. When Jiyoung from accounting called her name across the office, Rosalie's head turned, but her eyes stayed fixed on me for a heartbeat too long before following. "Did you notice anything weird about Rosalie today?" I asked Kyung-min during our coffee break, keeping my voice low. He shrugged. "She seems fine to me, maybe a little tired." But he hadn't seen what I'd seen. He hadn't watched her eat lunch, if you could call it eating. She'd picked up her kimbap with her left hand. Rosalie was right-handed, and she'd chewed with her mouth open, mechanically, as if she'd forgotten that teeth were supposed to meet. At 4 p.m., I heard her on the phone with a client. "Yes, of course, Mr. A pause, too long. "I apologize. Your name has slipped my mind." Rosalie never forgot a client's name. It was her gift, her superpower in sales. She remembered birthdays, children's names, favorite restaurants. It's why she'd been promoted twice in 2 years, while the rest of us fought for scraps. I watched her hang up the phone. Her fingers hovered over the receiver for a moment. Then she pressed them against her lips, hard. When she pulled her hand away, there was blood. She'd bitten her fingertip, deeply. The wound gaped like a second mouth. She stared at the blood with what looked like confusion. Then she licked it off and went back to typing. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I was paranoid, overworked. The Yagun culture at our company was brutal. Maybe my brain was simply misfiring from exhaustion. But at 6 p.m., when the office began to empty, I found myself lingering, pretending to organize files, watching Rosalie pack her bag. Her movements were wrong. She packed things in the wrong order, wallet first, then phone, then keys, when I knew for a fact she always grabbed her keys first. Muscle memory, habit, the kind of thing you don't think about, unless you're not the person whose body you're wearing. The thought came unbidden, and I pushed it away, but it lodged in my mind like a splinter. The elevator chimed, the office emptied. I was alone with Rosalie, and suddenly the space felt too small, the silence too thick. "Working late?" I asked, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. "Huh?" She turned, and her smile was perfect. Too perfect. The Rosalie I'd known for 3 years smiled with her whole face, eyes crinkling, a slight asymmetry from a childhood scar near her lip. This smile was symmetrical, mechanical, like someone had studied photographs of human expressions and was attempting to replicate one from memory. "Quentanayo, Samuel," she said. My name sounded strange in her mouth, the syllables landing wrong. "I was just thinking." I nodded and moved to my desk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I glanced back, Rosalie was still standing by the water cooler, still smiling. She hadn't blinked. The afternoon passed in a haze of spreadsheets and client calls, but I kept watching her from the corner of my eye. The wrongness accumulated in small details. She typed without looking at her screen. She laughed at a joke our manager made 3 seconds too late, as if the humor had to be translated through some internal delay.
When Jiong from accounting called her name across the office, Rosalie's head turned, but her eyes stayed fixed on me for a heartbeat too long before following. "Did you notice anything weird about Rosalie today?" I asked Kyung-min during our coffee break, keeping my voice low. He shrugged. "She seems fine to me, maybe a little tired." But he hadn't seen what I'd seen. He hadn't watched her eat lunch, if you could call it eating. She'd picked up her kimbap with her left hand. Rosalie was right-handed, and she'd chewed with her mouth open, mechanically, as if she'd forgotten that teeth were supposed to meet. At 4 p.m., I heard her on the phone with a client. "Yes, of course, Mr. A pause, too long. "I apologize. Your name has slipped my mind." Rosalie never forgot a client's name. It was her gift, her superpower in sales. She remembered birthdays, children's names, favorite restaurants. It's why she'd been promoted twice in 2 years, while the rest of us fought for scraps. I watched her hang up the phone. Her fingers hovered over the receiver for a moment. Then she pressed them against her lips, hard. When she pulled her hand away, there was blood. She'd bitten her fingertip, deeply. The wound gaped like a second mouth. She stared at the blood with what looked like confusion. Then she licked it off and went back to typing. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I was paranoid, overworked. The Yagoon culture at our company was brutal. Maybe my brain was simply misfiring from exhaustion. But at 6 p.m., when the office began to empty, I found myself lingering, pretending to organize files, watching Rosalie pack her bag. Her movements were wrong. She packed things in the wrong order, wallet first, then phone, then keys, when I knew for a fact she always grabbed her keys first. Muscle memory, habit, the kind of thing you don't think about, unless you're not the person whose body you're wearing. The thought came unbidden, and I pushed it away, but it lodged in my mind like a splinter. The elevator chimed, the office emptied. I was alone with Rosalie, and suddenly the space felt too small, the silence too thick. "Working late?" I asked, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. "Huh?" She turned, and her smile was perfect. Too perfect. The Rosalie I'd known for 3 years smiled with her whole face, eyes crinkling, a slight asymmetry from a childhood scar near her lip. This smile was symmetrical, mechanical, like someone had studied photographs of human expressions and was attempting to replicate one from memory. "Quintanayo, Samuel," she said. My name sounded strange in her mouth, the syllables landing wrong. "I was just thinking." I nodded and moved to my desk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I glanced back, Rosalie was still standing by the water cooler, still smiling. She hadn't blinked. The afternoon passed in a haze of spreadsheets and client calls, but I kept watching her from the corner of my eye. The wrongness accumulated in small details. She typed without looking at her screen. She laughed at a joke our manager made, 3 seconds too late, as if the humor had to be translated through some internal delay. When Guillaume from accounting called her name across the office, Rosalie's head turned, but her eyes stayed fixed on me for a heartbeat too long before following. "Did you notice anything weird about Rosalie today?" I asked Kyung-min during our coffee break, keeping my voice low. He shrugged. "She seems fine to me, maybe a little tired." But he hadn't seen what I'd seen. He hadn't watched her eat lunch, if you could call it eating. She'd picked up her kimbap with her left hand. Rosalie was right-handed, and she'd chewed with her mouth open, mechanically, as if she'd forgotten that teeth were supposed to meet. At 4 p.m., I heard her on the phone with a client. "Yes, of course, Mr. A pause, too long. "I apologize. Your name has slipped my mind." Rosalie never forgot a client's name. It was her gift, her super.
Chapter 3. The Aswang Coworker. The brownout hit at exactly 11:43 a.m., and that's when I knew I wasn't alone with something human. Our municipal office in Jinhae had been plagued with power issues for months. Old infrastructure, the city council kept saying, "We'll fix it next quarter." But this was different. The darkness came too fast, too complete, as if something had swallowed the light rather than simply turning it off. I was in the records room with Tonyo. I'd been trying to avoid being alone with Tonyo for 3 weeks. "Kenchana, rough." His voice came from somewhere to my left, and I flinched. I hadn't heard him move. "It'll come back on." "Neh," I managed, pressing myself against the filing cabinet. The metal was cold through my shirt. In the darkness, I could hear him breathing. It was too slow, too controlled, the breath of something that had learned to mimic human rhythms, but couldn't quite get the timing right. A match flared. Tonyo's face appeared in the small circle of light, and I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. His eyes caught the flame wrong. They reflected it yellow, not red, like a cat's eyes, like something that hunted in the dark. "You've been watching me," he said conversationally, "every day. You think I don't notice?" The match went out. I didn't answer. I couldn't. For weeks, I'd been cataloging the wrongness, small things at first, the way other employees' lunches would go missing from the refrigerator, replaced by a smell of raw meat that no one else seemed to notice, the way Tonyo always volunteered for night shifts. The stray dogs in the alley behind our building had started disappearing, one by one. Then bigger things. The shadow that followed him was never quite right. When he walked past the windows at noon, the sunlight seemed to bend around him, as if even the sun didn't want to touch his skin. And his smile, God, his smile, showed teeth that were just slightly too sharp, too numerous, crowding his gums like he had a second row waiting to descend. The lights flickered back on. Tonyo was inches from my face. I hadn't heard him move at all. "Chumshim kachimokulka?" he asked. "Want to get lunch together?" His breath washed over me, and underneath the coffee and cigarettes, I caught something else, something copper-rich and raw. "I brought food from home," I said too quickly. His smile widened. "Of course you did." I spent lunch at my desk, not eating, watching him in the reflection of my computer monitor. He sat alone in the breakroom, his lunchbox open before him. I couldn't see what was inside, but I saw his chopsticks rise and fall, heard the wet sounds of chewing. When he caught me watching in the reflection, he winked. The afternoon crawled by. At 3 o'clock, old Mrs. Kim from administration pinned a new crucifix above the front door. It was blessed, she announced proudly. Her daughter's church had performed a special ceremony, Chuisang Tuichiyung, to keep the ghosts away. Tonyo walked in 5 minutes later. I saw it happen. He passed under the crucifix, and for a moment, less than a second, his whole body flickered. His skin rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Something dark and twisted moved beneath the surface of his face, pressing outward, straining against the mask of humanity. Then it was over. He was just Tonyo again, walking to his desk, sitting down, turning on his computer. But there was smoke rising from his shoulder, a thin wisp, barely visible, where the crucifix's shadow had touched him. I watched him brush at it absently, and when his hand came away, I saw the skin beneath was blistered. He looked directly at me. His eyes, in the fluorescent light, were not brown. They were yellow. After that, I started documenting everything: dates, times, incidents. The notebook filled quickly.
October 3rd, Tonio worked until midnight. Security guard reported hearing animal sounds from the records room. October 7th, 3 cats found dead in the parking lot, throats torn out, no blood remaining. October 12th, coworker Mina joked about Agun during lunch. Tonio laughed too long, too loudly, and his tongue, I swear his tongue was too long, touching the bottom of his chin. October 15th, power outage. I heard Tonio singing in the darkness. The song was in no language I recognized. The whispers started circulating, old stories from the country, tales that grandmothers told to frighten children. Guemul, Guishin, Gumiho. But the word that kept surfacing again and again was one that didn't quite fit, a word borrowed from Filipino coworkers at a sister office in Manila, Aswang, a creature that wore human skin during the day and hunted at night, a thing that craved human flesh, especially the young, the vulnerable, the ones no one would miss. 3 homeless people had vanished from the park near our office in the last month. No one in town seemed to care. It was October 23rd when I made my mistake. I stayed late to finish a report, Yagun, always Yagun, and lost track of time. By the time I looked up from my monitor, it was past 10, and the office was dark except for my desk lamp and the light from the break room. I should have left, should have grabbed my bag and run, but something pulled me forward. Morbid curiosity, perhaps, or the need to finally know, and I crept toward the break room door. It was cracked open. Through the gap, I could see Tonio. He was eating. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The sounds were wet, organic, the sounds of teeth tearing through something that resisted. His back was to me, hunched over the break room table, and in his hand was a finger, human, small, a child's finger, still wearing a tiny silver ring. He bit into it the way one might bite into a piece of chicken, and the bone crunched. I must have made a sound, I don't remember, but Tonio's head turned, not his body, just his head, rotating a full 180 degrees on his neck, like an owl, like something that had never been constrained by human anatomy. His face was wrong. The skin had peeled back from his forehead, revealing something gray and ridged beneath. His mouth was open too wide, his jaw unhinged like a snake's, and the teeth, there were so many teeth. "You should have gone home, Ruff," he said, and his voice was a chorus, 100 voices through one throat. "Now I have to decide what to do with you." I ran. Behind me I heard laughter that turned into something else, a shriek, high and piercing, inhuman. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I was home, doors locked, every light on, my grandmother's old crucifix clutched in my shaking hands. Tonio didn't come to work the next day, or the day after. His desk was cleaned out by Friday, his personnel file marked resigned without notice. No one asked questions, no one investigated. In Korea, you don't question departures, you simply bow your head and continue working. But I know he's still out there, because sometimes, late at night, I smell raw meat on the wind. And when I look out my window at the darkness between the streetlights, I see yellow eyes looking back.
Chapter 4. The Demonic Bullies. The first time I saw Jong-ho's true face, I was bent over my desk, trying not to cry. "Ya, Jibo! What's this garbage?" He slammed my report onto my desk, pages scattering. "Did you write this with your feet, or did your mother type it while she was giving birth to you?" The laughter from his circle, Minsuk, Daejung, the others, echoed through the audit firm's open floor plan. It was 7 p.m., and most of the normal employees had gone home. But the normal employees weren't trapped with the night shift, with them. I looked up to apologize, and the words died in my throat. Jong Ho's face was wrong. Just for a second, less than a second, I saw something beneath the skin, something red and ridged with too many angles. His eyes flickered black, not just the pupils, but the entire sclera, like someone had poured ink into his skull. Then it was gone. Just Jong Ho again, handsome, cruel, his designer tie perfectly knotted despite the late hour. "Kenchanayo, sombe," I stammered. "I'll redo it." "You'll redo it?" He leaned close, and I caught a whiff of something that wasn't cologne, something sulphurous. "You'll do it right this time, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." The threats had started 3 months ago, when I'd first joined the firm. Seniority culture, I'd told myself. Son Hubei relationships. Every new employee went through this. It would get better. It hadn't gotten better. It had gotten worse. The insults followed me everywhere, in the office, in the restroom, in my dreams. The other new hires had stopped talking to me, afraid of becoming targets themselves. My work was sabotaged regularly, files deleted, clients reassigned, deadlines moved up without notice. But the worst part was the heat. No one else seemed to notice it, but whenever Jong Ho and his circle gathered around my desk, the temperature soared. The air conditioner hummed at full blast. I could see the vents working, feel the cold air from across the room, but at my desk it felt like an oven. My skin blistered, my shirt soaked through with sweat. And once, just once, I'd pulled back my sleeve to find an actual burn mark in the shape of a handprint. The doctor couldn't explain it. "Stress," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Sometimes the body manifests psychological trauma physically." But I'd seen the way his hands shook when he examined the mark. I'd seen the recognition in his face before he shuttered it behind professional calm. He knew what I was dealing with. He just didn't want to say. The hallucinations, if that's what they were, grew worse. I started seeing things in reflections that weren't there in the real world. Jong Ho's shadow on the wall stretched, too tall, too thin, with protrusions at the temples that looked like horns. Min Suk's teeth, when he smiled, seemed to go on forever, row after row, disappearing down his throat. And the laughter followed me into empty hallways, into the parking garage, into my studio apartment at 2 a.m. when I lay awake staring at the ceiling. It was always coming from just around the corner, always just out of sight. "You look terrible," my mother said when I visited for Chuseok. "When did you last sleep?" I couldn't tell her. Couldn't explain that sleep meant dreams of fire, of being dragged through burning corridors by hands that sizzled against my skin, that I woke every morning with new burns on my arms, my chest, my back, burns that the doctor kept attributing to stress and self-harm, neither of which explained why they appeared in places I couldn't reach. The confrontation happened on a Thursday. I was alone in the conference room, preparing for a morning presentation I knew would be sabotaged. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. In the darkness, I heard footsteps. Too many footsteps. They surrounded me. "Kiboya," Jong Ho's voice, but layered now, harmonic, as if multiple people were speaking through his mouth at different pitches. "We've been so patient with you, so generous, but you keep making mistakes." A lighter flared. In its glow, I saw them.
Not Jong-ho and his friends, not anymore. They had shed their human shapes like old skin. Jong-ho was nearly 8 feet tall, his body elongated and wrong, joints bending backward. His skin was the red of fresh meat, and from his forehead sprouted 2 horns, curved and ridged like a goat's. His eyes were pits of flame. The others flanked him, equally transformed. Minsuk with wings of skin stretched between fingers that had become claws. Daejung with a mouth that split his face from ear to ear, filled with teeth like broken glass. "You see us now," Jong-ho said, and his voice was the roar of a furnace. "Finally. You've been so resisting so long, but everyone breaks eventually." I tried to run. A hand caught my shoulder, burning, searing through my jacket and shirt and into the meat of my body, and I screamed. The lights came back on. I was alone in the conference room. My shoulder was smoking. Through the hole in my shirt, I could see a handprint branded into my flesh, the fingers clearly defined. I quit that day. Didn't give 2 weeks' notice, didn't collect my final paycheck. I walked out of that office and never returned, not even for the box of personal items they called me about months afterwards. But leaving wasn't enough. Because I still see them, in crowds, on the subway, in the faces of strangers on the street, a flash of horns in a window's reflection, eyes that burn too bright, smiles with too many teeth. They let me go, I think. They're not hunting me anymore. But they wanted me to know, to always know, that the monsters wearing human skin are everywhere. That they walk among us, wearing suits and ties, climbing corporate ladders, attending church on Sundays, and that if I ever speak of what I saw, ever try to warn anyone else, they'll come back. They'll finish what they started. The burns have never fully healed. On bad nights, they pulse with heat, and I hear laughter from empty corners of my apartment. On the worst nights, my reflection in the mirror shows horns beginning to sprout from my own temples. And I don't know anymore if I escaped them or if they're simply waiting for me to ripen.
Chapter 5. The Octopus-Like Factory Owner. The smell hit John before he even entered the building. Heishim Seafood Processing occupied a warehouse at the edge of Busan's industrial docks, and the reek of rotting fish had seeped into every surface, the concrete, the metal, the very air. But underneath the expected stench was something else, something older. Something that made John's hindbrain scream predator, even as his conscious mind insisted he needed this job. 23 and desperate, the perfect target for places like this. "You start tonight," the manager had said on the phone. "Night shift pays better. Don't ask why." John hadn't asked. He should have asked. The factory floor was a nightmare of industrial machinery and fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. Conveyor belts carried endless streams of sardines to be gutted, cleaned, canned. The workers moved in silence, too much silence for a floor of 40 people. They kept their heads down. They didn't look at each other. They especially didn't look at the door at the far end of the hall, the one marked Madam Im, with a cloth covering the window. "Madam Im is Nugoyo?" John asked his assigned supervisor, a hollow-eyed man in his 50s who smelled like fish and fear. The supervisor's face went pale. "Don't ask about Madam Im. Don't talk about Madam Im. Don't look at her office. Do your work. take your pay, and go home. But don't. The word was a hiss, urgent and terrified. Some of us have been here 20 years. Some of us know what happens to people who ask questions. John let it drop. He worked his shift, gutting sardines until his hands were raw and his back ached. The conveyor belt hummed, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and from the far end of the hall, from behind that cloth-covered window, something wet and heavy shifted. He told himself it was machinery. For 3 weeks he told himself that. But the signs accumulated. The suction cup marks on the floor near Madame M's office, perfect circles pressed into concrete hard enough to leave indentations. The trails of slime that appeared each morning and were frantically mopped away before sunrise. The way certain workers, the ones who'd complained about pay, about conditions, about anything, simply stopped coming to work. Their lockers cleaned out, their names never mentioned again. And the sounds, God, the sounds. Late at night, when the machinery paused between cycles, John heard something from behind that door. Not mechanical, not human. A wet, rhythmic sound, like something massive moving through spaces too small for it. A clicking that might have been suction cups releasing from metal. And once, just once, a low moan that vibrated through the floor and made his teeth ache. "What is she?" he finally asked his supervisor after a month of sleepless nights. The supervisor looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. "Take this, triple your salary, never ask again." John stared at the money. It was more than he'd make in 3 months of honest work. He took it, but he couldn't stop watching that door. It was a Tuesday when his curiosity finally killed whatever was left of his innocence. The power went out. Rolling blackouts were common in the industrial district, and in the darkness he saw the door to Madame M's office swing open. Just a crack, just enough for something to slither through. John pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing. The emergency lights hadn't kicked on yet, and in the absolute darkness he could only hear wet sounds, heavy, dragging sounds, something massive moving across the factory floor, knocking against machinery, sending empty cans clattering. Then it passed within feet of him. He smelled the ocean, not the fresh, clean ocean of beaches and sunshine, but the deep ocean, the lightless trenches where things lived that had never seen the sun, brine and blood and something else, something ancient and utterly alien. A tentacle brushed his leg. He didn't scream. Some survival instinct, older than humanity, clamped his mouth shut and locked his muscles in place. The tentacle was thick as his thigh, covered with suckers that seemed to taste his skin through his work pants. It lingered for a moment, curious perhaps, or deciding if he was worth the effort, then withdrew, dragging wetly across the concrete. The lights came back on. The thing was gone. But his pants were torn where the tentacle had touched him, and in the tears his skin was covered with perfect circular welts, each one oozing a clear fluid that smelled like the deepest part of the sea. He should have quit, should have run and never looked back, but the money kept coming. Envelopes slipped into his locker, amounts that tripled, quadrupled, as if someone knew he'd seen something and needed to be kept quiet. And the factory needed workers, always needed workers. His final night came in December. A pipe burst in Madame M's office. The maintenance crew refused to go inside, so the supervisor volunteered John, pressing another thick envelope into his hands and whispering, "Don't look at her, don't speak to her, fix the pipe and leave." The door opened to a darkness that light refused to penetrate.
John stepped inside. The office was larger than it should have been, extending backward into shadows that seemed to swallow his flashlight's beam. The air was thick with humidity, warm and salty, and every surface was slick with moisture. In the center of the room, behind a desk piled with papers and fish bones, sat something that might once have been a woman. Her upper body was human, or human enough, an elderly woman's face, stern and calculating, with eyes that reflected the light like a fish's. Her hands, folded on the desk, had fingers that were too long, too many-jointed, with suction cups where fingerprints should be. Below the desk, hidden by a cloth that now seemed laughably inadequate, something massive coiled and shifted. John counted 6 tentacles before his brain refused to process any more. They were enormous, scarred, covered with suckers the size of dinner plates. Some had tiny hooks, like a squid's. Others had teeth, rows of tiny needle-sharp teeth ringing each sucker. "You've been curious," Madam M said. "Curiosity is expensive. Are you prepared to pay?" John couldn't answer. His flashlight slipped from his numb fingers and clattered to the floor. One of the tentacles uncoiled. It rose behind her, towering over her desk, over John, casting a shadow that seemed to fill the room. At its tip, a single enormous eye opened, not a suction cup, an eye, human in shape, but ancient and vast, and utterly without mercy. "My family has owned this coast for 300 years, Madam M continued. "Before the Japanese, before the kingdoms, we came from the deep places when humans were still learning to fear the water, and we will still be here when your kind has returned to the mud you crawled from." One of the tentacles descended, wrapping around John's chest. The suckers sealed against his shirt, his skin. They began to pull. He screamed as his skin stretched, as the tiny teeth bit in, and something ancient and hungry began to feed not on his body, but on something deeper, his strength, his years, his future. Then she released him. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. When he looked at his hands, they were liver-spotted, old man's hands. He was 23 years old, and his hands looked 80. "Consider that a sample," Madam M said. "Now go, fix your pipe, collect your pay, and never look at my office again." John fixed the pipe with shaking hands. He collected his envelope, thicker than ever, stuffed with bills. He walked out of the factory and into the cold December night. He never went back. But he aged 40 years in the next 6 months. His hair turned white. His joints ached with arthritis. His doctors couldn't explain it. Rapid onset progeria, they said, baffled. But that's impossible in someone your age. He knows what it really was. Some nights, when the wind comes off the ocean and carries the smell of fish and deep water, John swears he can feel tentacles wrapped around his chest, still feeding, still pulling, drawing.
Chapter 6. The Overtime Ghost. The typing started at exactly 11:47 p.m. I was alone on the 32nd floor of our sole office tower, surrounded by empty cubicles and the hum of sleeping computers. Outside the windows, the city glittered with a million lights, but in here, the fluorescent tubes had gone to energy-saving mode, leaving pools of shadow between the desks. I wasn't supposed to be here this late. No one was. But the Kim project had a deadline that didn't care about labor laws or human limitations, and so here I was, George Park, loyal employee, working yagun for the 3rd night in a row. The typing came from the far end of the floor.
I told myself it was nothing. Building systems, HVAC, the automatic defragmentation process that IT ran overnight. But the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. The staccato click of fingers on a keyboard, fast and precise, like someone racing to meet their own impossible deadline. "Yubblesale?" I called out, my voice thin in the empty space. "Is someone there?" The typing stopped. The silence was worse. I forced myself to focus on my screen, on the spreadsheet that blurred before my exhausted eyes. Numbers swam together. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and in the reflection of my monitor, I saw a chair on the far side of the floor slowly swivel toward me. I didn't turn around. I didn't look. 20 minutes passed. The typing didn't resume, but I could feel something watching me, a pressure at the back of my neck, a weight in the air that made breathing difficult. The temperature dropped by degrees. My breath began to mist. It wasn't cold enough for that. At 12:15 a.m., my desk phone rang. I stared at it. The phone shouldn't work this late. The system was programmed to redirect all calls to the after-hours line, which was monitored by a service in a different time zone. But the phone rang anyway, shrill and insistent, and on the caller ID screen, I saw my own extension. I was calling myself. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped after exactly 13 cycles. In the silence that followed, I heard footsteps, high heels on industrial carpet, approaching from the direction of the typing. Click, click, click. Closer, closer. They stopped directly behind my chair. I couldn't move. My hands were frozen on the keyboard, my eyes fixed on the screen, and in the dark reflection of the monitor, I saw her. A woman in office uniform, white blouse, pencil skirt, low heels. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, the kind that took 15 minutes every morning. She was standing directly behind me, close enough to touch, and she was staring at the back of my head with eyes that didn't blink. Her face was wrong, too pale, too still, and where her eyes should have reflected the monitor's light, there was only darkness, two pits of absolute nothing set in a face that once was human. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, she was gone. But my screen had changed. The spreadsheet was closed. In its place was a document, a Word file I'd never created, filled with text I'd never written. I worked late every night for 7 years. I hit every deadline. I never complained. I never took vacation. I was the perfect employee. And they didn't even notice when I died. But you notice, don't you, George? You're just like me. You'll work yourself to death in this office, and they'll find your body slumped over this same desk, and they'll say what a shame it is, what a dedicated worker, and then they'll replace you within the week. Unless you go home now. Go home, George, while you still can. I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed my bag. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice, trying to get it into my pocket. The elevator seemed 1,000 miles away, through a gauntlet of empty cubicles and shadow, and I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran. The elevator doors opened on the first ring. Inside, the overhead light flickered. In the flickering light, I saw her again. She was standing in the corner of the elevator, her jack impossibly bent, her head tilted at an angle that no living neck could achieve. Her mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear, and her hands were typing, fingers moving frantically over invisible keys. "Gah," I whispered, "please, I want to go home." The typing stopped. She straightened slowly, vertebrae popping audibly.
Her head rotated to face me, and when she spoke, her voice was the static between radio stations. Chibe gagoshi poyo. I want to go home. Then go, I begged. Please, just go home. I can't. The words crackled with something that might have been grief. I died here. My body is here. My desk is here. My work is never finished. The elevator shuddered and began to descend. She watched me all the way down, her eyes those impossible voids, her fingers never stopping their phantom typing. When the doors finally opened in the lobby, I threw myself out without looking back. But I heard her voice one last time as the doors closed behind me. Yagun to heaheo, George. Uri dul da. We have overtime to do, George, both of us. I found out who she was the next morning. Her name was Park Min-jung, and she died at her desk 3 years ago. Heart attack, discovered by the cleaning crew at 6 a.m. She'd been working on a deadline. She'd been 34 years old. No one had noticed she was missing because she never went home anyway. I transferred to a different department, different floor, different office. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't, because last night, alone in my apartment at 2 a.m., I heard typing from the living room. I went to investigate. My laptop was open. The screen glowed with a Word document, filling itself with text I wasn't writing. You should have left, George. You should have gone home while you still could. Now you're just like me. Now you're never going home. I unplugged the laptop, threw it in the closet, buried my head under pillows and waited for dawn. But even with my eyes closed, even with the laptop dead and dark, I could still hear typing. And somewhere, in the space between waking and sleeping, I felt cold fingers on my keyboard, learning to type my suicide note.
Chapter 7. The Arrogant Man and the Storage Room Spirit. Alan was laughing. That was the worst part, his laughter echoing off the walls of the 7th floor as he stood in front of Storage Room C with his arms spread wide like some kind of corporate messiah. Grecian? Ghosts? He turned to face the crowd of coworkers who'd gathered, drawn by his boasting. You people are pathetic, grown adults afraid of a closet. I stayed at the back of the group, watching Gary's face. He looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Somebody, please, Gary tried one more time. People have heard things, seen things. Manager Yoon says... Manager Yoon is a superstitious old woman. Gary grabbed the door handle. The metal was cold. I saw frost forming around his fingers, even though it was July. And I'm going to prove it. Watch me spend the night in this room, and tomorrow no more excuses about why the files aren't organized. The storage room had been locked for 3 years, ever since the incident. No one talked about it directly. This was Korea, after all. Some things were simply understood. But everyone knew the stories. The intern who'd been sent to organize old files and never came out quite right. The security guard who'd found him the next morning, sitting in the corner, staring at nothing, unable to speak, unable to remember his own name. They'd retired him with a generous severance. They'd locked the room. They'd never spoken of it again. Until Alan. Alan, who'd transferred from the American branch. Alan, who thought Korean workplace culture was quaint. Alan, who never learned that some doors stay closed for reasons that have nothing to do with fire codes. He opened the door. The darkness inside was absolute. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something that consumed it. I saw the shadows lean outward, reaching for Alan like fingers. A smell washed over us, mold and paper, and something older, something that had been rotting in the dark for years. See? Alan stepped across the threshold. Nothing but dust and... The door slammed behind him. For a moment, nothing happened. We stood in the hallway, frozen, staring at the closed door. Then we heard Alan's muffled laughter from inside. Very funny. Who set that up? The door springs, right?
A folder slid under the door, one of the old client files from the storage room archive. It was covered in mold and blood. "Alan!" Gary rushed forward, grabbing the handle. It was locked. No, not locked. Frozen. The metal burned his hands with cold, and he yanked them back with a yelp. Inside, the laughter stopped, replaced by something else. At first, I thought it was wind, a low moan, rising and falling, building in intensity. But wind doesn't form words. Wind doesn't whisper names. "Alan, Alan, Wewassa?" The voice was not human. Too many tones at once, layered like a chorus of the dead. "Why did you come?" "What the— Let me out!" Alan's bravado was gone. I heard him pounding on the door, the thuds getting more frantic. "Let me out! This isn't funny anymore!" The lights in the hallway flickered. One of the ceiling panels in front of the storage room cracked. Not fell, cracked. Spiderwebs of fractures appearing in the fluorescent cover as if something heavy had pressed against it from above. "Gyoman-hei, nomu Gyoman-hei." The voice was laughing now, a sound like grinding glass. So arrogant, so arrogant. The door began to rattle, not from Alan's pounding, from something inside, something that was pulling at it from the other direction, yanking so hard the hinges groaned. Through the gap at the bottom, I saw shadows moving, not one shadow, but dozens, swirling like a hurricane made of darkness. "Open the door!" Gary was crying, pulling at the frozen handle with his bloody palms. "Someone help him!" But no one moved. We were paralyzed, not just by fear alone, but by the sense that something was watching us from inside that room, something that had been waiting a very long time. The door exploded outward. Alan came with it, not walking, not running, but flying, launched from the storage room with force enough to crack the opposite wall. He hit the plaster and slid down, leaving a smear of blood. Behind him, in the doorway, I saw it. The shape. I still can't describe it properly. My mind refused to process it then, and it refuses now. There were limbs, too many limbs, and eyes that reflected nothing. There was a mouth that opened sideways, and teeth that went back and back forever into a throat that had no bottom. And there was rage, such rage. It lunged, not at Alan, at all of us, at every person who had whispered about it, laughed about it, kept it locked in that room like a forgotten problem. I felt the cold of it pass over me, felt my heart stutter, felt my vision go white. Then it was gone. The door to storage room C drifted closed on its broken hinges, revealing an interior that looked exactly as it always had. Neat rows of files, shelves of old records, no blood, no shadows, nothing wrong at all. Except for Alan's desk calendar, lying in the center of the floor. Every page had been torn out except one, today's date. On it, written in handwriting that definitely wasn't Alan's, Naga, Dashin Ojima. Leave, don't come back. Alan resigned the next morning. I've never seen a man look so broken. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't collect his personal items. He just walked out the front door with the shuffling steps of someone who'd seen something that had fundamentally rewritten his understanding of reality. I heard he moved back to America. I heard he still can't sleep without lights on. I understand, because since that night, I can feel something watching me whenever I pass storage room C. The door is locked again, triple locked now, with chains and padlocks that management insists are for safety. But locks don't matter to things that live in the spaces between walls. And every night before I leave the office, I hear something scratching at the inside of that door. Patient, waiting, because Alan wasn't the first to challenge it, and he won't be the last.
Chapter 8. The Cursed Scam Hub. The phones never stopped ringing. That was the first thing you learned in this place, the basement office in Guro Digital Complex, where we worked jobs that didn't officially exist. The phones rang 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, connected to call centers in China and servers in countries whose names I couldn't pronounce. We called the elderly. We pretended to be their children. We convinced them their bank accounts were compromised, their grandchildren were in prison, their lives were in danger. And we took their money. 100,000 won at first, then 1 million, then 10 million, then everything. I'm telling you this so you understand. We weren't innocent. None of us. Whatever happened next, we deserved it. But Lester deserved it most of all. "천만 won!" He threw his headset on the desk, spinning his chair like a child. 10 million won from one call. That old Halmoni thought I was her grandson the whole conversation. The room erupted in forced cheers. Our bosses, 2 men who never gave us their real names, emerged from their office to shake Lester's hand. Money was counted, soju was poured, and I sat at my station, headset still on, listening to the static in my ears and trying to ignore the bile rising in my throat. My name is Kaloi, or it was before I stopped deserving one. I'd been working here for 6 months, long enough to see what this job did to people, the hollow eyes, the twitches, the way we all flinched when phones rang in our personal lives, long enough to start hearing things, voices in the static. Fragments of conversations we'd already had, played back at half speed, whispers in Korean and Japanese and languages I didn't recognize, and sometimes the voices of the people we'd scammed, asking questions that no recording should know to ask. Why did you lie to me? Where is my money? I trusted you. I thought I was going crazy. Maybe I was, but on the night of Lester's big score, the crazy became reality. It started small. As Lester celebrated, the fluorescent light above his desk flickered, not the normal flicker of a dying bulb, but a strobe, violent and irregular. His headset, still connected to his computer, began to crackle. I heard it from my station, a voice coming through his speakers, even though his call had ended. "넌 죽을 거야. You will die." Lester didn't hear it. He was too busy pouring another shot, laughing at something Min Jun said. But I heard it, and when I looked at his screen, I saw his chat window filling with text, not from any operator, not from any script. "I will come for you. I will take what you took. I will blow up your skull." The message repeated, scrolled, filled the entire screen with the same sentence in Korean, Japanese, languages that existed and languages that didn't. "Lester," I started to say. The lights went out. All of them. The computers, the phones, the emergency exit signs. For one long moment, we sat in absolute darkness. The only sound, the hum of dying hard drives and the ragged breathing of 20 scammers who'd suddenly realized we weren't alone. Then Lester screamed. The lights came back on, not fluorescent, not electric, but a sickly green luminescence that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. In that light, I saw Lester still sitting at his desk, but his body was wrong. His veins were glowing. Through his skin, I could see his circulatory system lit up like neon tubes, the blood inside them not flowing, but pulsing. His eyes were wide, rolled back, showing whites that had turned the same poisonous green. His mouth was open, and from it came a sound that was not quite human, a keening, rising wail that hurt my ears. 뭐가 일어나는?
Minjun couldn't finish the sentence. Lester's head exploded, not like a gunshot, not like anything I'd ever seen. It was as if the pressure inside him had built to a point beyond containing, and the skull, the bone itself, had simply given way. Blood and gray matter and something else, something that looked like green light made liquid, sprayed across his desk, his computer, the coworkers who'd been standing too close. His body sat there for a moment, headless, blood pumping from the stump. Then it collapsed. The scream that broke out wasn't mine. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the message still scrolling on Lester's ruined monitor. I will blow up your skull. I will blow up your skull. The bosses moved fast. Years of illegal operation knew how to sanitize a scene. Bodies were wrapped in tarps. Hard drives were wiped. By morning, Lester's station was empty, and anyone who asked was told he'd gone home to Daegu. But I knew the truth. We all knew, and the phones kept ringing. I went back to work the next night because I had no choice. The bosses made it clear, leave and we'd be reported to the police as the sole operators of the scam ring. Stay and we'd be protected, complicit, trapped. So I sat at my station, 3 desks away from where Lester had died, and I put on my headset. The static was waiting for me. At first, it was just background noise, the usual hiss and crackle of international connections routed through a dozen proxy servers. But as the night wore on, the static began to change. It grew thicker, more textured, like something was swimming through it. And then I heard voices. Not my marks, not my coworkers, the voices of everyone we'd ever scammed, layered on top of each other, speaking in unison. Huriton turyochua, give us back our money. I ripped off my headset. The voices continued, not through the speakers, but inside my skull, echoing in the spaces between my thoughts. Minjun was staring at me from across the room. His face was pale, his eyes too wide. He was hearing it too. We all were. The lights flickered. On every screen in the room, the same message appeared. Nuga taumyua. Who's next? I looked at Lester's empty chair, still stained with something the cleaning crew had missed. Then I looked at my own hands, veins visible beneath the skin, and I wondered if they were starting to glow. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. 3. I stared at it. Another buzz. E2. My heart stopped. My hands wouldn't move. The static in my head was screaming now, a chorus of the damned counting down to something I couldn't escape. The third buzz never came, but I know it will. Tonight, tomorrow, next week, the countdown has started, and there's no way to stop it. Every call I make adds another voice to the chorus. Every won I steal shortens the fuse. Lester was first, but he won't be last. And somewhere in the static, I can hear my own grandmother's voice, the one I haven't called in 3 years, the one I've been too ashamed to face, asking me the same question over and over. Kaloya, mohagoisa. Kaloi, what are you doing? I don't have an answer anymore. I just keep working, and I keep listening to the countdown that never quite reaches 1.
Chapter 9. The Grim Reaper's Visit. The fluorescent lights were giving me a migraine. That's what I told myself, that the pounding behind my eyes was just the lights, just the endless ringing of phones, just another 12-hour shift at Hanakam call center in Incheon, not the feeling that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Ina, chankaman!
Pauline grabbed my arm as I passed her station. Her face was the color of old paper, sweat beading at her temples despite the aggressive air conditioning. "Do you have any painkillers? My head is killing me." I dug through my bag and handed her a packet of ibuprofen. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't tear it open. "Sonbe, maybe you should go home," I said. "You look really sick." "Kenchana." She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just need to make it to the end of shift. 6 more hours." She wouldn't make it 6 more minutes. I didn't know that then, only that as I walked back to my station, the air felt different, heavier, colder, saturated with something that made my skin want to crawl off my bones. The fluorescent light's floor stretched out before me, 200 agents in identical cubicles, headsets clamped to their skulls, voices blending into a constant murmur of scripted politeness. But something was moving between the cubicles. At first I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the flickering lights, an optical illusion born of exhaustion. But shadows don't move against the light. Shadows don't have shape. This had shape. It was tall, 7 feet, maybe more, unfolding from the corner of my vision like a nightmare given permission to exist. Its body was humanoid but wrong, elongated, skeletal, with limbs that bent at too many angles. The skin stretched over its bones was gray and translucent, and through it I could see the architecture of death itself. Ribs like prison bars, vertebrae like stepping stones, a skull that grinned with teeth that had never needed to chew. Over its face hung a veil, dirty white fabric that moved without wind, that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light rather than reflect it. No one else saw it. 200 agents continued their calls, typing and talking and breathing, completely unaware that death was walking among them. It moved slowly, deliberately, passing between the cubicles with the patience of something that had never needed to hurry. Its feet didn't touch the ground. It was heading toward Pauline. I opened my mouth to scream, to warn her, to do something, but my voice wouldn't come. My body was frozen, locked in place by a terror so primal it predated language. I could only watch as the figure stopped behind Pauline's chair. She was still rubbing her temples, still trying to focus on her screen, still alive for a few more seconds. The figure raised one hand. The fingers were impossibly long, each joint visible beneath the papery skin, tipped with nails that looked like they'd been sharpened on bone. The hand descended slowly, so slowly I could see individual dust motes parting around it, and came to rest on the back of Pauline's head, right where she'd been rubbing, right where it hurt. Pauline's body went rigid, her hands stopped moving, her mouth froze mid-word, whatever she'd been saying to the customer on the line, dying in her throat. I saw her eyes widen, saw recognition flash across her face, the terrible understanding of what was happening. Then they went blank. Her headset slipped from her ear and clattered against the desk. The customer's voice, tinny and confused, drifted up from the fallen earpiece. "여보세요? Hello? Are you still there?" The figure withdrew its hand, slowly, almost tenderly, and as it did, I saw something rise from Pauline's body, a shimmer, a distortion like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. It drifted upward, drawn toward the figure's outstretched palm, and then it was gone. Pauline slumped forward onto her keyboard, the keys depressed under her weight, filling her chat window with random characters, ASDFGHKL semicolon, 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 semicolon. "Sonbe?" The agent next to her looked over. "Sonbe? Pauline Sonbe?"
The scream started then, not from Pauline, she would never scream again, but from the agent who touched her shoulder and felt the unnatural stillness of a body that no longer held a soul. The call center erupted into chaos, people rushing, shouting, someone calling for an ambulance that wouldn't arrive in time. Through it all, I stood frozen at my station, watching the figure that no one else could see. It was looking at me. Beneath the veil, I felt its attention like a physical weight, not hostile, not hungry, just acknowledging. It had seen me see it, and that meant something. Its mouth moved, no sound came out, but I understood the words anyway, felt them form in the space behind my eyes. Ajik ania inya, hajiman kot. Not yet, Inna, but soon. Then it turned and drifted away, passing through the wall as if the concrete were water, leaving behind only the screaming and the chaos and the body of a woman I'd shared lunch with just that morning. The paramedics said it was a brain aneurysm, sudden, painless. They probably didn't even know what was happening, they assured us, as if that made it better, as if the lie of a peaceful death could erase the truth of what I'd witnessed. I finished my shift. There was nothing else to do. The call center didn't close for death, didn't pause for tragedy. 200 agents, -1. 200 headsets, -1. The work continued. But as I sat at my station that night, trying to focus on the script scrolling across my screen, I noticed something. Shadows, tall, thin shadows, clinging to the walls at the edges of my vision, gathering in the corners where the fluorescent lights didn't quite reach. More of them than before, more of them every night. I counted 3 last week, 7 yesterday. Tonight, there are 12. They're not coming for me, not yet, but they're watching. They're always watching now, these figures in their funeral veils, these collectors of something more precious than breath. And I've started to notice that every agent they stand behind looks tired, looks pale, looks like they're running out of time. Pauline wasn't the first, she won't be the last. And somewhere in the static between calls, I can hear the figure's voice, patient as eternity, counting down names. Mine is on that list. I just don't know how far down.
Chapter 10. The Energy-Sucking Child. The fluorescent lights in the Suwon District Social Welfare Office buzzed with a frequency that made my fillings ache, but that wasn't why I couldn't concentrate. Team Leader Choi was rubbing her leg again. She did it constantly now, a compulsive, unconscious gesture, her hand traveling down to her right calf every few minutes to massage flesh that no amount of pressure could soothe. Dark circles had carved permanent homes beneath her eyes. Her skin had the waxy pallor of someone who hadn't slept well in months, years. And I knew why. Because I could see the thing that was feeding on her. I'd always seen things other people couldn't. Gishin, my grandmother called them when I was young, the dead who refused to leave, the spirits too hungry or too broken to pass on. She'd taught me to ignore them, to look through them, to pretend the old woman standing in the corner of the convenience store or the child walking backward down the subway stairs simply didn't exist. But I couldn't ignore this. It was crouched beneath Team Leader Choi's desk, wrapped around her right leg like a parasite. A child, or something that had once been a child. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, dressed in a school uniform from the wrong decade, shorts instead of pants, a collar that hadn't been fashionable since the 70s. His skin was the gray-blue of a drowning victim, mottled with bruises that would never heal, and his mouth was attached to her calf. Not biting, sucking.
his lips sealed against her skin through the fabric of her stockings, his throat working rhythmically as he drew something out of her that wasn't blood. I could see it flowing into him, a faint luminescence, like light filtered through dirty water, traveling from her body into his. Her life, her energy, whatever it is that separates the living from the dead. He was draining her dry, one swallow at a time. "Sujina, are you okay?" Team Leader Choi's voice snapped me back to the room. "미안합니다, 팀장님. I was just thinking about the Kim case." "Well, think faster. We have deadlines." She went back to her paperwork, her hand drifting unconsciously to her leg again. The child adjusted its grip, finding a better angle, and resumed feeding. I'd been working at this office for 3 weeks, 3 weeks of watching it happen, 3 weeks of meetings and case files and coffee breaks, all conducted under the unblinking gaze of a hungry ghost that no one else could see. The office was infested. Not just the child, though he was the worst, the most persistent. There were others. In the break room, an old man sat in the corner, weeping silently into hands that passed through the table. In the file storage closet, a woman with a crushed chest stood among the shelves, waiting for someone to find her, not realizing it was 50 years too late. In the bathroom mirror, faces that weren't mine looked back at me, mouths moving in pleas I couldn't hear. This building had been something else before it was a welfare office, a hospital someone had mentioned, or a police station, somewhere a lot of people had suffered, a lot of people had died, and their suffering had left stains that would never wash out. But the child under Team Leader Choi's desk was different. The others were just echoes, memories of pain replaying on an infinite loop. This one was aware. This one was hungry. This one knew I could see it. On my 5th day, it looked up from its feeding and stared directly at me. Its eyes were too large for its skull, the whites yellowed with age and need. Its lips peeled back from teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, crowding its small mouth like a shark's. It smiled. Not at me, at what it saw in me, the energy that flowed from Team Leader Choi to its waiting throat. "You're new," it said. The words didn't travel through air. They formed directly in my mind, cold and invasive. "Fresh, I can smell it on you." I didn't answer, couldn't answer. My grandmother had warned me about this, about engaging with the hungry ones, about acknowledging them as anything more than shadows. Attention fed them almost as much as energy, but ignoring it was getting harder. Every day the child appeared in different places, under my desk during a team meeting, its small fingers brushing against my ankles. In the hallway as I walked to the printer, matching my pace, its bare feet leaving no marks on the carpet. In the window's reflection as I packed up to leave, standing just behind my shoulder, whispering things I tried not to hear. "She's almost empty," it whispered to me as I worked late. Team Leader Choi had gone home hours ago, but the child had stayed, somehow untethered from its usual host. 6 months, maybe less, then I'll need someone new. I kept typing, kept my eyes on the screen, kept pretending I was alone. "You could volunteer." Its voice was almost sweet, almost like a real child's. "It doesn't hurt, not really. You just get tired, a little more tired every day, until one day you don't wake up." "Leave me alone," I whispered. "I can't." A cold hand touched my shoulder. I flinched, but the weight remained. "I've been so hungry for so long. There used to be so many people here. Sick people, hurt people, people with nowhere else to go. They fed me for years, but now there are only office workers, and office workers are never enough." I stood abruptly, gathering my things. The child watched me go, its 2 large eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights. "You'll be back," it called after me. "They always come back, and when she's empty, I'll remember how sweet you smelled." I submitted my resignation the next morning. Team leader Choi tried to talk me out of it. "You're doing so well," she said, and I could see how much the words cost her, how much effort it took to form sentences, to care about anything beyond the exhaustion that was consuming her from within. "Just give it a few more months." "I can't." The words came out harsher than I intended. "I'm sorry, Team Jungnim. I just can't." She didn't ask why. Maybe she didn't have the energy. As I packed my desk, I looked one last time at the space beneath her chair. The child was there, as always, its mouth sealed against her leg, its throat working with obscene patience. But now it was staring at me, and it was smiling. "I'll see you soon, Sujin," it whispered inside my skull. "You or someone like you, there's always someone new." I left that office and never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I feel cold fingers brush against my ankle. I wake to bruises on my legs that I don't remember getting, and when I look in the mirror, I see dark circles forming under my eyes, the same circles Team Leader Choi wore like a death sentence. The child is patient. It knows where I work now, and I'm starting to feel very, very tired.
Chapter 11. The Ghost of the Parking Lot. Hemi went to buy lunch at 12:33 p.m. I watched her leave, her plus-size frame moving through the lobby with the comfortable efficiency of someone who knew exactly which food cart had the best tteokbokki. She waved at the security guard, adjusted her jacket against the October chill, and pushed through the revolving doors into the Bundang afternoon. At 12:35 p.m., she walked past my desk. The same jacket, the same silver earrings, but something was wrong with her face, something I couldn't identify at first, something that made my brain stutter and refuse to process what my eyes were seeing. Then I realized. She was clutching her chest. "Gianna!" Her voice was thin, reedy, like wind through a cracked window. "Help me! Something's wrong. Something's—" I stared at her. I'd watched her leave. The revolving doors were still rotating from her exit. "Sanbei, you literally just walked out to get lunch." Hemi shook her head, violent, frantic, her hand pressed harder against her chest, fingers digging into the fabric of her blouse. "I'm here. I'm right here. Weamodon bois. Why can't anyone see me?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she was gone. Not faded, gone, as if someone had deleted her from existence mid-sentence. The chair she'd been leaning against was empty. The space she'd occupied held nothing but recycled office air. My phone buzzed, a text from Hemi. "Bude chige mogule? Want bude chige?" She was ordering lunch. She was in the food court, texting me, alive and normal. But I'd seen her die. Hadn't I? The rest of the workday passed in a haze. I answered emails. I attended a meeting. I nodded at appropriate intervals when my supervisor talked about quarterly projections. And the whole time, I kept glancing at Hemi's desk, waiting for her to return, waiting to confirm that what I'd seen was just exhaustion, just stress, just my imagination punishing me for too many late nights. She didn't come back. By 2 p.m., people started asking questions. By 3 p.m., the supervisor sent someone to look for her. By 4 p.m., security found her body in the basement parking lot, slumped between 2 sedans with a scattered bag of food containers around her. Heart attack, that's what the paramedics said. Massive cardiac event, probably dead before she hit the ground. At least it was quick, one of them offered, as if speed were a comfort to the dead. But I knew the truth. She'd come to me,
Somehow, in the moment between life and death, she'd come to ask for help, and I'd stood there asking stupid questions about how she left through the revolving doors. The funeral was held 3 days later. White chrysanthemums, weeping coworkers, a photograph of Hemi smiling in better times. I sat in the back and didn't cry, because crying would mean accepting, and I wasn't ready to accept. I wasn't ready for what came next either. The first sighting was a week later. One of the night security guards came to work pale and shaping, refused to patrol the basement lot alone. "I saw her," he kept saying. "The woman from the 5th floor, the one who died. She was walking between the cars, carrying a bag, like nothing happened." Management dismissed it as trauma, overwork. The guard was given 2 weeks paid leave and told to see a counselor. But then other people started seeing her. The janitorial staff emptying trash at midnight, a late-working analyst going to his car at 10 p.m., even the building manager checking the fire exits on a Sunday morning. They all described the same thing, a plus-size woman in a familiar jacket wandering the basement level, clutching a bag of food containers, looking lost, looking for help. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, tried to throw myself into work, into distraction, into anything that would silence the growing dread in my chest. But every time I passed the elevator, I heard something. Footsteps, the rustle of a plastic bag, the faint, desperate voice asking why no one would help. It was only a matter of time before she found me again. It happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the funeral. I'd stayed late to finish a presentation, yagun, always yagun, and the office had emptied around me until I was alone on the 5th floor. Or I thought I was alone. The footsteps started at 9 p.m., heavy, slow, coming from the direction of the elevator. I told myself it was the cleaning crew, the security guard, anyone normal and living. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too measured, and underneath them I heard something else, the rustle of a plastic bag. "Gianna!" Her voice came from directly behind me. I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around. My body was frozen, every muscle locked in a paralysis born of pure, primal terror. "Gianna, help me!" The voice was closer now, right behind my chair. "I went to get lunch. I was just going to get lunch, but then my chest hurt and I fell, and I can't find my way back." Cold air washed over my shoulder, the smell of food, tteokbokki, budae-jjigae, the meals she'd never gotten to eat, mixed with something else, something organic and wrong, the smell of a body that had started to decompose before anyone found it. "I'm still in the parking lot," she whispered. "Part of me is still there. Can you help me find it? Can you help me go home?" A hand touched my shoulder. It was cold, so cold it burned. I screamed. The sound shattered whatever spell had held me frozen. I stumbled out of my chair, away from my desk, and finally turned around. There she was, Hemi, or what remained of her. Her face was the color of old wax, her eyes clouded, her lips tinged blue. She was wearing the same clothes she died in, but they hung differently now, as if the body beneath them had settled into new configurations. In her hands, she clutched a plastic bag that rustled with phantom weight. "Why won't anyone help me?" she asked, and her voice cracked with something that might have been grief or might have been rage. "I just want to go home." I ran. Down the stairs, not trusting the elevator, through the lobby, past the night guard who called after me in confusion, out the front doors and into the cold October night where I stood, gasping on the sidewalk until my lungs stopped burning and my heart stopped racing. When I looked back at the building,
I saw a figure in the 5th floor window, standing where my desk was, watching me go. I transferred to a different branch the next week. Different building, different district, different everything. I told myself it would be enough, that ghosts were tethered to places, that running meant surviving. But last night, as I walked to my car in my new building's parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, slow, and the rustle of a plastic bag. I haven't turned around yet. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll see Hemi there, not asking for help anymore, but finally taking the answer she needs. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and some ghosts will follow you until you give them what they want.
Chapter 12. The Reality Glitch and the Brain Tumor. The office was wrong when I came back from the bathroom. Not subtly wrong, not a misplaced pencil or a shifted chair, but fundamentally, completely, impossibly wrong. My desk, which had sat against the interior wall for 2 years, was now by the window. Kim Deddy's station, which had been across from mine, was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a filing cabinet I'd never encountered before. The nameplate on my desk said Bakmin Jun in neat Hangul. My name is Andre. I blinked. The office snapped back. My desk was where it had always been. Kim Deddy was typing away across from me, and my nameplate read my actual name in my actual handwriting. Kenchanayo? Kim Deddy looked up, frowning. You've been standing there for like 2 minutes. Fine, I said, just tired. I sat down. I opened my email. I tried to pretend that reality hadn't just folded itself in half and shown me the seams. It wasn't the first time. The glitches had started 3 weeks ago, small aberrations that I'd attributed to stress, to overwork, to the Yagun culture that was slowly crushing my soul. A coffee mug that was full when I knew I'd emptied it. A calendar showing Thursday when I distinctly remembered it being Wednesday. Coworkers calling each other by names I'd never heard, then reverting to correct names the next sentence. But they were getting worse. That afternoon, Team Jungnim walked past my desk. For one fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, there was a knife embedded in his skull. A large kitchen knife driven straight through the crown of his head, blood running down his face in rivulets that dripped onto his pristine white shirt. He was smiling, still talking on his phone, as if the knife were merely an accessory. I blinked. The knife was gone. The blood was gone. Team Jongnim continued his conversation, oblivious to my horrified stare. The quarterly report needs revisions, he said to me in passing. Have it on my desk by 4. His skull was intact. His skull had always been intact. I was losing my mind. The conference room floor was covered in blood during the 2 p.m. meeting. I sat in my chair, watching the thick red liquid pool around everyone's shoes, watching my coworkers step through it without notice, watching it leave no stains when the meeting ended and we all filed out. In the bathroom, my reflection moved 3 seconds after I did. I raised my hand. Mirror Me kept brushing his teeth. I turned away. Mirror Me kept staring forward, smiling a smile I wasn't wearing. By 5 p.m., reality had become a suggestion rather than a rule. The walls of my cubicle rippled like water when I wasn't looking directly at them. My computer screen showed emails in languages that didn't exist, scripts that curved and twisted in ways that made my eyes water. When I looked at my hands, sometimes they were my hands, and sometimes they were the hands of a stranger, older and more scarred, reaching for a keyboard I didn't recognize. I went to the hospital that night. I couldn't explain the glitches, so I made up symptoms: headaches, nausea, vision problems. Dr. Lee, A kind-faced neurologist with gray at his temples ordered an MRI. The machine swallowed me whole. Inside its humming cylinder, I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. The magnets whirred, the table vibrated, and behind my eyelids I saw things, flashes of images that came too fast to process. Faces melting, cities burning, a figure in a dirty white veil reaching toward me with fingers made of bone. When they pulled me out, Dr. Lee's face was wrong. Not concerned, not professional, just blank, empty, as if whatever made him human had stepped out for a moment and left something else in charge. "You have a tumor," he said. His voice was flat, effectless. "It's pressing on your occipital lobe. That's why you're seeing things." The MRI images on his screen didn't show a tumor. They showed faces, dozens of them layered on top of each other inside the white matter of my brain, screaming silently in shades of gray. Eyes and mouths and hands reaching outward from the tissue, begging to be seen. I blinked. The images showed a small dark mass in my visual cortex, perfectly ordinary, medically explicable. "It's benign," Dr. Lee continued, and his face was now normal, concerned, professional, human. "We can remove it with surgery. The prognosis is excellent." I nodded. I thanked him. I walked out of his office on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The hospital corridor was fine. Then it wasn't. The lights flickered, and the hallway stretched, longer, darker, lined with doors that opened onto rooms full of nothing but shadows. Patients in wheelchairs sat motionless, their faces turned toward me, their eyes replaced by dark pits that went down forever. A nurse walked past, carrying a tray of surgical instruments that gleamed with fresh blood. I ran. Through the lobby, past the reception desk, out the automatic doors into the Seoul night. I stood on the sidewalk, gasping, waiting for reality to reassert itself. It didn't. The city was different. The buildings were there, but they were wrong, cracked, crumbling, covered in creeping vegetation that shouldn't have been able to grow on concrete. The street was empty except for abandoned cars, their windows shattered, their frames rusting. And the sky was the color of a bruise, purple and yellow and sickly green, lit by no sun and no moon, but something else, something vast and distant that pulsed with malevolent light. Bodies lay in the streets, not fresh dead, old dead, rotted down to bone and sinew, half buried in debris. There were thousands of them, maybe millions, sprawling across the ruined cityscape in every direction. And among them, figures moved. Tall, thin, veiled in dirty white fabric. They glided between the corpses, bending occasionally to touch a skull or a rib cage, collecting something invisible with their long-fingered hands. One of them saw me. It turned. It began to drift toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but watch as it approached, its veil fluttering in a wind that didn't exist, its eye sockets, visible through the fabric, filled not with darkness, but with stars, actual stars, tiny points of light swirling in infinite depths. It reached for my head. Its fingers brushed my temple, and I was back. The street was normal. Cars passed. People walked to the subway. The sky was dark but ordinary, lit by neon signs and the distant glow of Gangnam's eternal nightlife. I stood there for a long time, shaking. The surgery is scheduled for next week. Dr. Lee says it's routine, minimally invasive, that I'll be back to normal within a month. He says the visions will stop once the pressure on my brain is relieved. But I don't think the tumor is causing the visions.
I think the tumor is why I can finally see. Last night, I looked out my apartment window at the city below. For one moment, just one, I saw both versions superimposed. Seoul as it is, glittering and alive. Seoul as it will be, ruined and dead. And in both versions, the figures in veils were watching, waiting. I go under the knife in 6 days. Maybe it will fix me. Maybe it will make me blind again to the truth of things, seal me back into the comfortable illusion that reality is solid and singular. Or maybe the surgery will remove the only barrier between me and whatever waits on the other side. I don't know which outcome scares me more. But as I write this, I can see my reflection in the window, and it's not moving in sync with me anymore. It's smiling. It's reaching toward the glass. And behind it, in the apartment that exists in the reflection, but not in my room, tall figures are gathering. They're waiting for me to fall asleep. They're waiting for the anesthesia to take me somewhere I can't come back from.